Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Real Science Exchange Dairy Producer Edition. Here we take a deep dive into the Real Producer Exchange webinars to highlight what's working and what's not on real farms across the globe. Hi, I'm Scott Sorrell, one of your hosts here tonight at the Real Science Exchange. Tonight, I'm joined by my partner in crime, Mr. Walt Cooley from Progressive Dairy Magazine. Welcome, Walt. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, Scott. Thanks for having me here. I'm happy to be here to talk about one of our recent episodes with dairyman Greg Nye and his operation. I had the opportunity to visit his farm a couple times now, and most recently on this visit, we took some video and presented that with the Real Producer Exchange episode that we did. With each visit at his farm, I learned something new and see some great advancements in dairy that he and his team are working on.
All right. Well, with that, let's get started. For our listeners, remember, you can watch the full webinar at either balchem.com/realscience or agproud.com/realproducer. We'll begin with Greg Nye's introducing himself and sharing insights about Mountain View Dairy.
Greg Nye with Mountain View Dairy. I am the operations manager for all three of our facilities and our farm ground. So this facility is a fully enclosed feed center. We started design on it in 2018, broke ground in 2020, took a year off because of COVID, moved in November of 2022. So we've been processing feed in here for not quite 3 years today. So with this facility, our three biggest benefits with it were certainly shrink loss, ration consistency, and also safety for our employees and deliveries. So this facility is kind of divided up into 4 separate zones. So where we're standing right now on the main feed floor is where all of our raw ingredients are housed for forages, and then also all of our concentrates that we do in-house premixes with. But everything is received externally. And so on this floor, we only ever have a single wheel loader running. And between the grain leg and our elevated door unloads, we never have a truck on the floor in the normal course of operation. The loader and the delivery truck are never running in the same line of traffic, and then all deliveries are external. So there's never any crossing traffic when we're receiving commodities or feeding.
Talk a little bit about that back of the napkin moment. You know, you were talking specifically in that video about trying to keep traffic flows so you didn't have feed trucks in the same spot as loaders, and safety as well as some efficiency related things. So what was the back of the napkin moment to even conceive?
So on that piece with our original feed center, and that same fly that was messing with us the day we did that video, he's back again. But the one of the challenges that we had with our old feed center, because part of it was we'd outgrown it so much, but we had to be taking deliveries while we were feeding, and just due to the layout of it, when we had a delivery truck in a bay, we couldn't get into that bay, and it also blocked traffic to the mobile mixers. And so when we were laying this out, one of our goals was to keep all lines of traffic completely separated for employee safety, but also for efficiency. Because I mean, a truck coming in, unloading, getting out of the way, that was costing us, 15 or 20 minutes a load by X number of loads a day. And so we were losing a lot of time to that. One of the driving design concerns on this was how to keep that traffic flow separated so that so everything could move as efficiently as possible.
When we went out to Scott to record Greg on farm, he really dove into this new feeding center that they've been using. And this next clip shows how they are receiving the feeds, and then the different bays that they use to receive feeds and how they work, and the order of operations for building a ration on their farm.
What we got going on here is again trying to keep deliveries out of the line of feeding traffic. On the east side of this facility, we have a truck unload. So just like you would see at a grain elevator, everything's unloaded off that elevator, and we've got about 130,000 bushels of shell corn storage outside. So whole corn goes in that, and then the rest of our commodities come through a drop leg into a conveyor system that has doors that open into each one of the individual bays down here. And so we can take a product right off the rail across the scales and deliver it into a bay where we're only going to handle it once until we're processing it. But each one of these bays will hold a minimum of 100 tons of any given commodity. Some of the denser products, we can certainly put more than that in, but if we fill the capacity, we can operate as a standalone for about a month on deliveries, which never ever happens, but. So on this side of the facility, you can see behind us, there's overhead doors above each one of the bays. And so on the west side of this facility, there's a ramp down to, for what it is, natural ground level. So when we have deliveries coming in on this side of the facility, we can open the door and a truck backs up. There is a curb stop there. So when the trailer hits the curb stop, the tail end of the trailer is actually hanging into the bay, and we can just unload right over the wall. And these bays are a little bit smaller because we're turning these products over faster, where it's our, especially our forages, but they can receive without ever interrupting feeding or anything that's going on in here. So in this facility, because we're both batching feed to deliver to animals and we're doing our own premix rations here, the way things are laid out is our high use ingredients that are going to go into pretty much every load of feed we're going to deliver are all up towards the front of the facility where the mixers are. So we've got dry hay, corn silage, small grains, a grain premix, and then ground corn up here in the front. So just trying to keep our cycle time short so that we can deliver feed as quickly and effectively as we can. And then our premixes, when we're not trying to put feed in front of animals, those are longer runs down this facility when we're not in a time crunch to get animals fed, and we've got time to take those longer runs. So with the board, we've got just a general overview of the facility. And so we do write what ingredient we have in what bin, because one of our goals is that we've always got an empty bin. And so, for instance, just because soy hulls is in bin 19 right now, the next time we get a delivery, it might not be going to bin 19. We may be putting it in 24 or any of the other bins on that side, with the idea that we're weighing everything into the bay. And then when the bay is empty, that's how we can zero out that ingredient and be able to track our shrink on it. And so we don't always accomplish it, but the goal is to have an empty bin so that we're always rotating stuff around so we can keep our inventory fresh and so that we can track how our shrink efficiency is going. So processing feed is very simple. I mean, we need to load raw ingredients into a mixer tub, process it to actually those soy hulls that we saw coming in. And so we've got it set up so that for these guys, because I mean, there's 4 or 5 different conveyors you have to start. There's half a dozen slide gates that have to be set properly. But I mean, right now we've got it down to about 3 buttons that you have to hit. I mean, the feed processing side, we've got dialed right in. The receiving side of it, there's still a little bit of cleaning up to do.
If you're listening to this only in audio format, make sure to watch the entire webinar on YouTube, where Greg takes a deeper dive into the number of touches that they have for each feed. And specifically, he talks about how they went down to just 1 touch for the corn that they're feeding to their cows. And that has been a huge savings and really accelerated the payback for their facility that they built for the indoor feeding.
That's right, Walt. The innovations happening with their feeding system are truly setting new standards in the industry. In this segment, we'll explore how they're mixing rations. Let's listen in.
The actual processing part of this is pretty straightforward. I mean, we're using traditional twin screw stationary mixers. Everything that we're doing as far as inventory management is a 2-part piece, and we're using Amelicor's easy weights and easy feed programs. And so everything that's coming in here comes in across our scale, gets recorded into inventory with a location through, either the grain silos or the different bins. And then as we process feed, all of our rations are run through easy feed. And so that is And that's the batch ratios for our rations, how much of which ingredient, tracking our inaccuracies there, and also removing that feed from inventory. And so that piece of it is pretty straightforward. Out here are a standalone operation. We take care of maintenance in the facility and any breakdowns or repairs, but because my service team isn't necessarily in this facility every single day, the cameras are set up looking directly down into both mixer tubs. And so from the office or even a cell phone, if you wanted, we can pull up a mixer tub, see if it's mixing, and truthfully off those cameras, we can't take it down to a granular level, but we can see how well those mixers are blending without having to get up on top of them and look inside them. One challenge that luckily we foresaw before we moved in here, it was included in the original design, but bringing commodities in, we've got a 16-foot drop to the floor, so that does generate some dust. But the bulk of the dust generated in a processing facility is right on top of the mixer tubs. And so we've got a baghouse collection system like you'd see on any sort of industrial complex that's doing processing outside the facility. And the collector hoods are mounted right above the mixers where we do generate the bulk of our dust. So there is an updraft right there. And as we're loading, it's with the doors open, it's not perfect. We're about 80% dust capture. But then that dust, as we've collected it, we've actually run samples of it, and it's primarily hay and grain dust. So we dump it right back into our premix ration and run it through again. So shrink was one of our biggest challenges, especially being in the Intermountain West where the wind blows a lot, and warehousing the bulk of our commodities. We were storing everything in traditional three-sided feed storage facilities and a little bit outside on a concrete pad. And so we had a little bit of weather damage from rain, but specifically wind and animal damage. And our best shot at it when we were putting this facility together is we were running about 7.5 to 8% shrink, and moving into this facility, we cut that to consistently 2%.
Moving right along in the feeding process, our next clip explains how they're delivering rations. Let's see what Greg has to say.
The two stationary mixers can both feed this big conveyor that's in the shop, and that conveyor will hold a full load of whatever ration we're doing. We've learned that its capacity is about 45,000 pounds. Our typical rations aren't that heavy. But so we can actually have 4 loads going at any given point in time, one staged on the conveyor, one that's finishing processing, one that we're loading, and then one being delivered. And the delivery box that's down here has no mixing capabilities, so it's just like a big chuck wagon kind of a thing. So it's got a front discharge on it. It is pulled by a semi truck, but it's got its own power pack on it, so the trailer itself is completely self-contained, and the truck is just a prime mover. So when the delivery truck comes back, it takes about 2 minutes to load a full load of feed on, refresh the software on his tablet so he knows what pens he's going to, and be gone again. But the delivery box does have 4 cameras set up on it, so they've got both sides and rear view, and then one that's directly into it so they can see how it's loading.
Greg, talk a little bit about, to the audience, if you would, just designing the system. Loading feed into tubs. You mentioned that that's kind of a standard procedure for many dairies, but now we're talking about getting feed out of these tubs into some kind of wagon and then in front of cows. So this is really where I think the innovative part of what you guys have done on your dairy is started there. So talk a little bit about first that elevator, how it's custom built, unique.
And truthfully, that piece of the system is it's probably the piece that was the most challenging out of the entire operation, that ties into this. One of the most valuable things that we have as producers in the dairy industry, at least according to my father, and I've kind of adopted his mantra, is R&D, which if you're outside of our industry would be research and development, but quite truthfully is rob and duplicate. And so as we were designing this facility, We looked at different material handling operations. We looked at bulk moving, batch plants, kind of all across the country in different design concepts, and kind of put everything into one bag for this. The one interesting thing that we found was almost in our backyard, about an hour and a half up the road. There was a dairy that had been using stationary mixers and had put a big feed conveyor in place because location of the mixers, they couldn't get trucks in and out. And so they actually kind of piloted the staging feed piece, and we took that back to our operation because it does allow us to stage pretty much 4 loads of feed at any given point in time. We can be delivering one, have one sitting on the conveyor, one that's finishing processing, and one being loaded. And so taking that concept, and we refined it a little bit to fit the scale of what we were doing, just added an incredible amount of efficiency to it. And the delivery box was a challenge. My initial design on that, I tried to do like the option to unload off both sides, some stuff like that, just to make travel paths a little more efficient. We had some significant challenges with that piece. And I mean, when we started this facility up, quite truthfully, we were able to process feed. We got a load of feed onto the conveyor. We got it onto that delivery box, and then we couldn't get it back off the delivery box again. And so there were certainly some challenges the first 6 or 8 months as we were refining a bunch of that stuff. But today it works really well. Certainly credit to Lowen Manufacturing on that one, because I took pretty much a sketch on a napkin to them and said, "This is what I want to do. What can we do?" And I mean, they came back with solutions. And as we worked through some of my design issues and stuff, they worked through the whole thing with us and made it work.
Scott, here in our final clip, Greg shares what he'd do differently and gives some advice to other dairy producers when expanding anything on their farm. Let's take a moment to listen in.
And the biggest piece of advice I'll give anybody, I don't care if it's a milking parlor, if it's a feed center, what it happens to be, is identify what your weak points are and focus on those as design points. And so, I mean, like you and I discussed, it was shrink, it was feed efficiency, it was the safety. And so as we were putting this whole thing together, those are things that we really focused on. And what we built was, from a design aspect, was probably our 5th major revision. You sketch something out on a piece of paper and look at how things are going to flow, how things are going to operate in it. And we scrapped a bunch of ideas, and then in the iteration that we built, we were making modifications right up on it. I mean, right up until we were pouring footings for the concrete. And so it's really, being very open and honest with yourself. What are the challenges that we see with whatever this facility is, and how are we going to address them? And we had some phenomenal support from our feed nutritionist and other vendors, and even people, completely outside of the ag industry that were willing to offer some advice on it. Right down to our electrical supplier, that when I gave them the electrical layout for it, they said, "There's a better way to do this. Why don't you do it this way?" And so, not being afraid to ask the questions and really dig in. But it wasn't, it was not a one-off, here we go, this is what we're doing. There were a couple of years of background work in it before we ever started moving dirt for the project.
Greg, I'd also like you to speak to the thing we talked about. Okay, so you built it. What would you do different about it? And like most people, I think you said, if we just had built it a little bigger. Yep.
And that was, and there is a little bit of irony in that, because it's a 57,000 square foot facility. I mean, we can hold, a couple 100 tons of corn silage. We can hold a couple 100 tons of dry hay. Any other ingredient, an absolute minimum of 100 tons, and just the way that deliveries happen, the way things ebb and flow, and changing ingredients as cost per ingredient changes. So we're going to drop one ingredient and add two to make up the difference on the ration balance. With all of that, 4 more days on the end of it would be absolutely beautiful, and probably not enough.
As we look ahead, the next Real Producers Exchange is Tuesday, February 17th, 2026, and will feature Skylar Gerke.
Yeah, Skylar is an Arizona dairyman, and he's an implant from the Midwest, actually. So he has a unique perspective on dairying in the West, but from a Midwestern perspective. I think anyone from the Midwest will have a interesting experience listening into how he got implanted first into Arizona and how he's doing there as a Midwestern background, now dairying in the West.
As a reminder, Skylar's Real Producer Exchange is scheduled for February 17th. To register, visit balchem.com/realscience or agproud.com/realproducer. And Walt, as always, thank you for joining me here once again. It's always good to have you there in the co-pilot seat. And to our loyal listeners out there, thank you for coming along on this journey with us. I hope you learned something. I hope you had some fun. I hope to see you next time here at Real Science Exchange, where it's always happy hour and you're always among friends.